It's a glaring statistic that Mayor Lori Lightfoot vowed to change. African Americans make up 70% of over 100 coronavirus deaths in Chicago.
But CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker dug into that data even more to see which neighborhoods are the hardest hit and found 5 hotspots.
Take a look at this map. Every blue point represents a man or woman who lost their life to COVID-19 in Chicago. The 5 communities with the highest number of coronavirus deaths: South Shore, Inglewood, Auburn Gresham, Chatham, and Austin. 24 people died in these neighborhoods. When we take a closer look at the map, we found something not very surprising. The communities with the most deaths have a majority black population. That big bubble there? Over 52,000 people live in South Shore. This neighborhood topped the list of coronavirus deaths. 6 out of 7 who died are black. Nearly 94% of people who live here are also black. Travel to the west. Austin, where more than 87,000 people live, 5 people here died. All were black. Nearly 88% of the people who live in this community are black. When you take a closer look at the data, neighborhoods with the most deaths are also some of the poorest. Inglewood, with a median income of $24,000, is the second poorest neighborhood in Chicago. It also had the second most deaths, a total of 6. Nationwide, older Americans are also more vulnerable to the virus. Our producer who analyzed the data discovered the same is true for Chicago, especially Black Chicago.
So if you look at Chatham as an example, 5 total people died of coronavirus in that neighborhood, and the median age there is 43, but every person who died was older than that. So that's really similar to pretty much every neighborhood we looked at that had the most deaths and also had majority black populations.
Brad and Erica, there is so much more to learn about the victims and the communities that they lived in. Mining the data will allow us to tell the stories and might shed some light on their surroundings and if those surroundings contributed to their deaths.
Today marks 88 days since the coronavirus was first confirmed in Illinois, and African Americans now represent 57% of all COVID-19 deaths in Chicago. In just the last 2 weeks, the number of black victims has tripled.
CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker first identified 5 hotspots using maps we created. Now she's digging deeper into that data and found in the neighborhoods where the victims lived, many have essential jobs that increase their chances of being exposed to the deadly virus.
Look no further than these blue points. These are people who died of coronavirus. Most of them live in Chicago's black communities, the hot spots for COVID-19 deaths. When we first took a look 2 weeks ago, 5 neighborhoods had the worst deaths: South Shore, Inglewood, Auburn Gresham, Austin, and Chatham. It was bad then. It is worse now. Inglewood is leading the way. The number of deaths has jumped from 6 to 23 as of last Friday. South Shore is almost as bad, 7 deaths last week, 22 by the weekend. Auburn, Gresham, Chatham, and Austin neighborhoods, all those we identified as hotspots, have also seen increases. A common thread among those who died: where they work.
When we consider the types of positions that many Black Americans hold, many of them are on the front lines in essential roles related to food delivery, grocery store work, transportation services.
The data we pulled reflects the reality. In Austin, where 19 African Americans died, nearly 11% of those employed work in transportation. That's nearly 3,500 people. In Inglewood, about 12% of those employed, or just over 2,000 people, also work transportation jobs. Another 1,200 work in food preparation. Dr. Carnathan uses the example of a 30-year-old grocery store worker.
He or she does not have symptoms. He or she is not coughing and sneezing, but they're talking, they're interacting. They are providing care for younger children. They are providing care for elders. When that happens, the virus spreads.
Another popular job in those communities are people who work in the healthcare industry, either as janitors or perhaps kitchen workers, people who have to go to work, they can't stay home, so they are exposed.
And tonight, CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker has been analyzing that data from medical examiners' reports and discovered a common thread among those who died: food.
She was the the best big sister ever.
But last month, Reverend Marshall Hatch stood over his big sister's grave and led the family in prayer.
It's a profound sense of loss for me.
Rhoda Jean Hatch died from complications caused by COVID-19.
She was 73 years old. She had battled asthma.
Hatch had lived in Austin, a community with the second highest number of coronavirus deaths. Like Hatch, many of those who die have underlying conditions. We wanted to know which chronic illnesses make victims more susceptible to the virus and why. So we started with a map where every blue dot represents a life lost. We focused on Austin and South Shore, analyzing the data from the medical examiner's office earlier this week. South Shore tops the list of communities with the most deaths. It's a majority African-American neighborhood where 81 people have died. Austin, also majority black, had 61 deaths. In Austin, 73% of underlying conditions had high blood pressure. 51% had diabetes. In South Shore, 70% had high blood pressure, 41% diabetes. Many had more than one chronic illness. Why such high numbers? Food.
The way that African Americans are marketed to with food is alarming.
Dr. Mercedes Carnathan studies medical trends in ethnic populations. She points to the numerous convenience stores in black communities that traditionally have few healthy food choices. But she's also frustrated with some major grocers that make it easy to be bad.
What has been made historically available to us in our communities has set us up for obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes. It just so happens that in the course of this severe pandemic, those are the exact conditions that are leading people to have worse outcomes from COVID infection.
What also hurts? Fewer major grocers in some black neighborhoods. Let's look at Austin, with a population of 88,000, mostly black, compared to Lakeview, same population, 88,000, but 77% white. We mapped the stores in those communities. They're represented by the red dots, and found there were only 3 major grocers in Austin, and if you live in the center of the neighborhood, you have to travel about 2 miles to get to them. Lakeview has 9 major grocers, including 3 Jewels. From the center of this community, you only have to walk about 4 blocks to the nearest store.
We know that this is a problem.
A problem Mayor Lightfoot promises to address. At a recent news conference, she introduced a parade of community leaders assigned to find solutions to the long list of inequities facing Chicago's black communities.
Food is at the top of the list.
Food was also a top priority for former Mayor Rahm Emanuel. In a 2013 press release, Emanuel announced a goal of completely eliminating food deserts for Chicagoans by 2020. But our map shows that hasn't happened yet in some black communities.
We've got to get this problem solved.
Now, the team Mayor Lightfoot put together is already working. We do know that the city sponsors a pop-up pantry with healthy food every Thursday, a pop-up pantry every Friday in South Shore. But of course, what we really need is a long-term solution. Brad and Erica?
Yeah, and Dorothy, as you mentioned, other politicians have promised and failed in the past. It's societal, it's generational. Fascinating information there, and interesting info about the major grocers. Are there any other communities that have such stark differences?
As a matter of fact, there are. We took a look also at South Shore and Edgewater. For example, South Shore, 94% black. Edgewater, 50% white. Those 2 communities have very similar populations, about 50,000 people. South Shore has 4 major grocery stores. 3 of them are local. Edgewater, 2 Jewels, Whole Foods, Mariano's, Aldi's, Target. And if you live in the center of South Shore, you will have to travel nearly a mile to get to any major grocery store. If you live in the center of Edgewater, you only have to walk about 4 blocks. The bottom line is that we need to see more major grocery stores in African American communities.
The Little Village neighborhood now has the second highest number of deaths in the city. It's one of 3 Latino communities added to the city's rapid response team, working in both Hispanic and black communities. The team started 4 months ago. CBS 2 investigator Dorothy Tucker looks at their successes and challenges.
What you like, meat and canned goods?
I come here just about every week.
Here, where volunteers with the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Corporation distribute food.
I got some hand sanitizer. I think they have some face masks in there.
And safety equipment to neighborhood residents.
I'm so humble and so grateful for these people here. I don't know what to do. With this pandemic, this is the most grateful thing. It's like it's God sent.
This gift from God,
We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
as Ronald Macon calls it, began in early April.
Good honey nut cereal, some dried blueberries.
One of several food giveaways where community organizations distributed more than 6,000 boxes of groceries to targeted neighborhoods.
Thank you.
It's part of efforts by Chicago's new Racial Equity Rapid Response Team.
Good morning, good morning.
Carlos Nelson is a member of the team.
The mission was to rapidly respond to the despair that COVID laid upon Black and brown communities.
The despair began in this community.
Auburn Gresham right here was the very first death related to COVID in the state of Illinois, the Friesen family, and 2 weeks later, a second sibling of that family died.
CBS 2 was the first to map the hotspots for coronavirus deaths in April. We found Auburn Gresham was one of the 5 communities with the most deaths, and many of the victims were Black. At the time, Auburn Gresham had 6 deaths, Austin had 5, and South Shore was number 1 with 7.
We can and we will organize a rapid, coordinated, community-based, and community-driven response.
After our report, Mayor Lightfoot targeted these 3 communities we highlighted.
Really about saving lives in our community.
It's an uphill battle. Today, the numbers are even higher. Take a look at our latest map. Deaths in Auburn Gresham have jumped to 36. South Shore has 114, and Austin 121. For the hardest hit spots, the numbers are more than 20 times what they were in April. And something else has changed.
Over the last couple of months, we have seen the numbers in the Latino community really go through the roof.
Since March, more than a quarter of those who have died are Latinx. So the task force expanded to include Pilsen with 32 deaths, Belmont-Cragen with 73, and Little Village has 119 deaths, the second most in the city.
One of the things that the task force has done is really let the data lead the work that's happening within the task force.
Safety is the #1 priority. 6 new testing sites have opened in the targeted communities, and more than 1 million masks have been distributed.
And so we went from a community that had very little access to masks and gloves and sanitizer, for example, to a community that has been working really hard to make sure that everyone has access to those things.
Task force leaders have also offered financial aid. In Auburn Gresham, 250 families received $380,000 to help pay rent, mortgage, and utility bills.
Many of the folks that come through are not destitute, not homeless. These are middle-income families that have been challenged by COVID-19, income loss and wage loss, and little access to food.
In Austin, they passed out 500 laptops and worked with Comcast to provide families with internet at a reduced cost.
A lot of the relief and the resources that people needed in order to acquire those things, it was online.
Although we are having an impact in this work and we are moving in the right direction, it's going to take some time for us to really address particularly the underlying issues that have gotten us to this point.
Those underlying issues, says Gutierrez, are a result of systemic racism in Latino and Black communities, inequality in education, employment, health, and housing. And Chicago is not alone in its desperate efforts to right the wrongs. In New York, community leaders there launched their task force in April, which included longer-term strategies. Several have already gotten off the ground, like new programs to help minority business owners navigate the government contract process, and a mediation project to help landlords and tenants settle rent disputes outside of court. Chicago's task force is also looking at projects to address years of racial disparities.
It's been vacant for more than 20 years.
Last month, the mayor announced $11 million in funding for 2 developments in the city's south and west side. Rehabbing this vacant building on 79th and Halsted is one of them.
We are going to gut it, and we are going to anchor it with a full-service health and wellness center.
But as COVID-19 deaths in communities like Auburn Gresham continue to grow, Carla says it'll take time to undo decades of neglect.
We've got a long way to go, I must say.
Efforts like these, thank you, are a start. A lot of work has to be done, but they still point to some successes. The increase in the number of people being tested, more folks wearing masks, and a better system for getting coronavirus information out to the public.